I'd like to introduce David Russick from Go for Angels, Patrick Meenan from Arthur Ventures, Joseph Berazanzi from Community Leader, Hassan Syed from Ideagist.com, Daniel Hobbs from Divi, and Rod Larkin from the Agricultural Utilization Resources Institute. Thank you, all of the panelists, for joining us tonight, and we look forward to an engaging discussion that goes with the panelists and the audience, too.
I'm going to start this. I think one of the things I want to take a look at that Barb touched on is what the current climate is here in Minnesota. I've seen things. I've been at this only for about 3 years, so the learning curve for me has been pretty big on the investor side. But I've seen a lot of change from 3 years ago to today, particularly in the last, say, year and a half. Patrick, you're involved heavily in Minnesota, but I know you mentioned to me recently that you travel a lot. So you're seeing a lot happening around, is it primarily the Midwest? Maybe you can describe that.
Yeah, sure. I'm Patrick Meenan. I'm a partner with Arthur Ventures. We're a venture capital firm that funds software companies anywhere outside of Silicon Valley. We invest primarily at the seed and Series A stage. And some local companies that I'm on point for us are Lead Pages, One I Work, and VidQ Flipgrid, in case any of those ring a bell. So to David's point, yeah, I mean, like I said, we fund companies anywhere outside of Silicon Valley. So we travel anywhere from, Seattle, Phoenix, New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Madison, and Minneapolis. And I think that a lot of the challenges are probably similar. I don't think I've actually been to a city outside of San Francisco or Boston where people are, bragging about how much venture capital they have, right? And they're saying we have all these resources, we don't know what to do with it. So I think the challenges are actually fairly similar. I would say that Minneapolis probably has a little bit more specialty on the medical device side, which I don't spend time in, but I actually believe what Barb had said, which was there are a lot of people who really scout out here for medical device. But outside of that, I think that a lot of the challenges that we deal with or some of the things that are unique about us in a good way are probably very similar across most cities in the Midwest.
Dan, you want to introduce yourself? You're an entrepreneur, and you've been kicking around. I know you presented to Go for Angels recently, and so you have some firsthand experience about funding and pitching and presenting. Do you want to share that with the other entrepreneurs?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Dan Hobbs. I started a company in college, sold that, started another company 2 years later, sold that, and now I'm on my third venture. I'm 1 year into the tech community, so I'm somewhat new on this side, but I've pitched in Minnesota, I've pitched in San Francisco, I've pitched on the East Coast. I met a lot of good people, and so a little bit of experience around. I honestly think Minnesota is a great place to be an entrepreneur and to have a company. I think San Francisco obviously has the energy and buzz that's there, but also San Francisco has a lot of the sexy companies, the consumer companies that everybody hears about, and therefore they associate, all good things come out of San Francisco. Minnesota does have a lot of great, maybe not Ubers, but a lot of other great companies coming out of there. And in pitching in San Francisco, I don't think once it became an issue that we were in Minnesota. There's a lot of interest. I think everybody that I pitched to said that they've already heard from Minnesota companies. Several of them have invested in Minnesota. From experience, I see that, it's an international world now. There's telephones, there's Skype. These folks, are okay with you not being there. They can still talk to you. So I think the energy in San Francisco is great. My personal view on business is that you should operate in a space of low competition. And when you go out there, for example, I was in Palo Alto at a Starbucks for coffee, and the 5 tables around me all had people pitching. And I was just trying to drink my coffee. I couldn't help notice. I felt like a bug in this whole sea of other people, And so yes, there's a lot more investment, but there's an equal number, if not more, of entrepreneurs. So one of the things I appreciate about Minnesota is that, you can operate in a space of low noise, and you can talk to people at the top, and they will listen to you. So.
Hassan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Hassan Sayed. I run a technology incubator here. 2 years ago, I started by the name Bir Ventures, and we are here as one of the hosts for a site called ideagist.com. And this topic is really interesting to me at various different levels. As an entrepreneur going through the process of finding investors, but also more importantly, IdeaGist is a platform that allows people to network with each other on their ideas. And what I see that there is a gap between when you come up with an idea as a concept and the time when you really get somebody to invest money in your idea, that gap is bigger here in Minneapolis or Minnesota compared to when you are like Los Angeles or Silicon Valley. And that gap is bigger from my perspective, I think, is because the investors themselves have to go through a learning curve. And we are not talking about that learning curve a lot. So that's my 2 cents.
Hi, my name's Rod Larkins. I'm the Science and Technology Director for AURI, that's Agricultural Utilization Research Institute. I come to AURI from a fairly in-depth background in research. I worked for 3M for 40 plus years in research and technology and business building, and then I worked for the University of Minnesota for 4 years as part of IRE, the Initiative for Renewable Energy and the Environment. So I got the opportunity to begin working for AURI. AURI is an organization that perhaps a lot of you won't be interested in, where we have a very narrow focus. We support agriculture in Minnesota, and our primary focus in agriculture is 4 basic areas: food, energy, bio-based materials, and co-products. And our mission is to add value to the commodities that are produced in Minnesota. And we've recently completed an in-depth study that was done by Battelle. I talked a little bit about this when I was here last year, that identified agriculture as a tremendous opportunity for investment and entrepreneurship in Minnesota, and developing true economic impact for the state. I believe that right now agriculture is the second largest industry in the state of Minnesota, and has been identified as being primarily responsible for the quick recovery of the economy of Minnesota, and the fact that Minnesota didn't fail quite as badly during the dark years of 2008 through 2011. So what AURI does is we don't provide money to anybody. We provide technology services. If you think about the kind of capabilities that are available to large companies like a 3M, for example, the research, the analytical, the engineering and scale-up support, none of those are available to the entrepreneurs. They basically are on their own. What they can't do themselves, they have to scratch money to find to provide that. And AURI provides that type of capabilities to the ag entrepreneurs in the state. What we're finding, as I look around the room, I see some of our clients here in the room, and some that are doing very well, by the way. But what we find is that the level of entrepreneurship in agriculture is growing, and growing very quickly. The thing that is concerning, I guess, to me is the fact that ag has a very difficult time finding venture capital and angel investment, and because it tends to be a longer-term investment, very process intensive, and you don't get the kind of capital turnaround that you see in some of the industries like software and medical devices, that kind of thing. But AURI will in fact work with entrepreneurs to help identify funding. I was happy to see Pat come, and Pat and I have worked together from my earlier years in 3M, where 3M participated as corporate sponsors for the small business SBIR and STTR grants. those are grants that can be very valuable to entrepreneurs because it's not free money. You have to work for it, but it comes to the entrepreneurs as unencumbered money. It's money that you can use. You don't have to give up any IP when you get the money. It's a real advantage. And AURI has scientists who will work with the entrepreneurs to identify and gain grants in that area. And so AURI provides a lot of service. We just don't provide money to the entrepreneurs.
Hi. Thanks. My name's Joseph Berzanze. I run a software and service company called Community Leader, and we provide the infrastructure for online platforms that are doing the solicitation, sale, and support of private securities. We have an office here, and we have an office in Silicon Valley in San Mateo. I travel back and forth. I refused to move there because I tried to find a comparable school district for my daughter. I currently am in the Edina School District, and pretty much I'd have to upgrade my house from a $350,000 house to about a $4.2 million house in order to be in a comparable school district, and that's an awful lot of frequent flyer miles. So I travel back and forth, and I enjoy it. And I do see a difference between the two cultures. Our joke in the office in California is that a startup in California is two guys in a garage. A startup in Minnesota is a spinoff from Medtronic. And it unfortunately feels like that far too often. There's also issues about, my employees in Minnesota really like leaving at 7 o'clock at night. And all I have to do is give a couple more Red Bulls, and my developers in Silicon Valley will stay till 2 in the morning. There's a very different culture about that, and there's good and bad to that. Community Leader is part of what we believe is the transformation of the private capital markets. We believe that there's a global transformation happening in how private capital flows, and that much of the infrastructure that we talk about that created things like Silicon Valley are gradually, over the next couple of years, going to really go through a big change. And that the JP Morgan conference that was talked about before is going to become a virtual, continual, online conference where people will be constantly pitching and where they are and will change. I recently listened to a debate about whether or not Amazon was a friend to the reader. Did anybody hear that on NPR? It was hilarious. But one of the things that they were talking about was that the change for Amazon with the publish your own meant that the gatekeepers associated. I probably said something wrong. No. That the gatekeepers associated with the publishing industry were no longer going to be able to determine what books we wanted to read or not wanted to read, that the direct publishing model of Amazon pushed hundreds of new opportunities. And I think that the quote-unquote crowdfunding, however we define that, is going to transform the role of the gatekeepers in the private capital space. And I want to talk about that real quickly, specifically as it relates to Minnesota. According to the University of Vermont, over 95% of private capital in the United States goes to businesses run by white men. According to the Kauffman Foundation, the percentage that goes to businesses run by women is so small it's negligible and not worth reporting. The plurality of private capital goes to Austin, Boston, New York, and Silicon Valley. And I don't think that market or that business model works for anybody, including those communities. And the transformation on the unintended consequences of the Jobs Act and the corresponding 23 states that have passed crowdfunding legislation, the EU, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, is creating a much more dynamic marketplace where we'll be able to launch portals and platforms in Minnesota and keep the money here locally so that folks don't have to retire or to send their money to Wall Street, so that it might trickle back down into Minnesota. They'll be able to invest in the Main Street businesses and the industries that they know here, and that we'll be able to attract investment from around the world and keep companies like mine from having to open parallel offices in Silicon Valley just so that we can have a close connection, relationship, and networking in the coffee shops with the investors there. There's plenty of investors here Fortunately, they're not participating in the local private capital markets here, sometimes because they can't legally participate, and that's what the Minvest bill and a variety of other legislative initiatives is changing and will continue to change.
All right. Well, I'm gonna continue the conversation from the viewpoint of Gopher Angels, and briefly, we're an angel network of around 65 individual investors. It's a network, meaning that each individual investor makes their own investment decisions versus a fund, which, depending, but in an angel fund might be invested by a majority rule within the group. So over the last 3 years, I have seen a lot of change, particularly as I mentioned earlier, the last year and a half. And why is that? Just the fact that when we had our first meeting 3 years ago, I think we had 8 investors in our group, 2 of which were my wife and me, so 6. And so now we're up to 65. So I think the money is loosening up. One of the concerns we had at the beginning, are people actually going to write checks? So I'm pleased to announce for our group, we're going to be shortly over $6 million invested in the last 2.5 years. That's money that would not have been there previously. The other thing that I see as a trend, and because it's Gopher Angels, they're contacting me, I'm seeing people from outstate recently come to Minnesota for the very same reasons that people from Silicon Valley are looking here, but it's not only Silicon Valley. Recently met with a Frontier Fund, I think it was called, from Charlotte, North Carolina. Very interested in what's happening in Minnesota, not only Minnesota, but the Midwest. Also had recently been meeting with people from Kansas City that are interested here, and we have developed relationships with other angel groups, Arthur Ventures out of North Dakota as an example, from South Dakota. We share deals with Nebraska Angels, Plains Angels, which is in Iowa, and which we've also co-invested and done due diligence together. And then we've also reached out to and have some due diligence that we've done with angel groups in Chicago. So what does this mean? This is all happening in the last year and a half. So I think a little bit under the radar from people's view, things are changing, and things are changing for the better. I think there's more money out there than you realize, but as entrepreneurs, you also have to realize you're competing for that money. And I will say that angel investors, this is not charity, and we're not philanthropy. We're in this to make money. So you have to prove to us as entrepreneurs that what you're bringing to the table is something I'm going to make money on. I'm going to make money on you. I'm betting on you to be a success so we can make money on that. And importantly, on the broader scheme, we can make money on that, get our money back, and then reinvest in the next entrepreneur. If there's no exit and there's no successful exit, there's no money to reinvest in the next startup. So anybody else want to chip in?
Yeah, I would just say 2 things based off what you have all said going around. I think one piece of advice that we always give entrepreneurs is if you're building a business, you don't just look for customers in your own state. You don't just look for employees in your own state, so why would you just look for capital in your own state? I've never quite understood it. I mean, I understand the piece of trying to go and find people locally, but I do think, to Dave's point about them working with other organizations, that I think entrepreneurs need to work hard to try and find other capital sources outside of their state, and I think it's actually easier than ever. It's kind of a dangerous question at a tech event, but are there any sports fans here? Any? There's got to be like 5, right? I kind of liken entrepreneurs today raising money not being that dissimilar from like high school athletes, right? So 10 years ago, it was really hard to find out who was a good high school athlete. And now there are all these programs out there where some kid in, upstate Minnesota can make a recruiting video, put it out online, and they get discovered by somebody. And this has become a huge business, right? I think as an entrepreneur, it's never been easier to be discovered, right? Whether it's having a profile on AngelList or having a blog or putting out something about how you landed 10 customers in a week and then that gets some coverage. We track that stuff all the time. So I actually think that there are a lot of other methods to get discovered, and we've actually seen companies that we've invested in get discovered that way. One I worked who spoke last year was a great example of that, where they actually had a firm from Silicon Valley reach out because they were tracking their web traffic and saw spikes in the web traffic, so reached out and said, hey, let's have a conversation, right? Clay Collins at Lead Pages actually, to Daniel's point, did a crazy thing and emailed an investor. And that investor was based in Boulder, Colorado, named Brad Feld, and was actually very interested in what they were doing. And so there's many different ways that you can go about it. And I like what you said about how it's not just going to be within these 4 or 5 cities. It's got to expand beyond that. I think there are a lot of macro trends that are making that happen, and I think Minnesota will benefit from that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think one of the key things there is recognizing that the legislative environment is, or the regulatory environment is one of those things that kept it local and kept it within the country club networks that you happen to be part of, because of the requirements for the pre-existing relationships and working through broker-dealers and working with angel groups where the folks who chose to participate showed up, and that represented less than 20% of the qualified accredited investors at all. And that now the changing of the regulatory environment gives us an opportunity to go beyond that and go beyond those gateways and open up and go on to EquityNet or onto the crowdfunding sites, or now legally be able to post your own offering, not just to talk about what you did do, but what you plan on doing. And I think that we're just a year and a half into the implications of those changes. And if we think about e-commerce in the first year and a half and where that was, and now go out to, taking that to its consequences. There's lots of companies that don't fit the flavor du jour of the venture capitalists. It used to be clean tech, so everybody figured out how to package their company as clean tech. Now clean tech's not the big thing, so all of those companies are trying to repackage themselves as energy data companies or whatever it is. And the reality is there's still lots of investors who care about clean tech and making a change in the environmental economy, and they're out there, and now we're beginning to be able to have the tools to reach them. And Minnesota, I think, will benefit from that enormously.
Yeah, Barb earlier asked how many entrepreneurs are in this room. So there were quite a few entrepreneurs, but when she asked how many investors were in this room, that was quite a small number. And I think that 65 angel investors, part of Gopher Network, as you said, is a very small number. $6 million is a very small number to be invested when you call ecosystem over here. So without actually addressing this problem of how to bring more investors, and I understand that we are part of the Midwest group who is trying to get the crowdfunding going over here, but there is an opportunity over here with lots of investors that are not investing, and there has to be a program that basically bring those new investors into this mix. It is not happening. I don't see any organization saying, here is every month we are running a schedule, conference or workshop for investors to understand what entrepreneurs need. Because we are all entrepreneurs over here. Everybody is going to tell us this is what investors need. But I think that there has to be a conversation what entrepreneur needs are and how investors need to understand. At least in this kind of economy that we live in, it's different. It's not like 10, 20 years ago how the investment was done. And in this different economy, there needs to be a proper program for investors to understand how to function. And Gopher Angels is doing really, really great. It's a great service, actually, even though you're right that it is for profit at the end of the day. And everybody wants to make profit, but at the same time, there needs to be some mechanism of bringing new investors into this mix, which is not happening. Yes, I can go to other states, as you were saying. I can find other investors from other places. I have got all those problems that we talked about. If I'm going to move to Silicon Valley, how much am I going to pay just for the move from here to Silicon Valley? So all those things are there, but we can tap into these resources over here. Somehow, if some organization would want to run this program and start bringing new investors into this mix.
I couldn't. Oh, no. just have to slam it. Okay. No, and I appreciate what you were saying. I think one of the missions for Go for Angels in the very beginning is exactly what you're talking about, bringing people new to that they did have to be accredited investors, but new to investing. And what that has done for us is actually a bit of a challenge, educating right on the mark our new to investing. And so what we've done every other month, well, first we started, I don't know if this is important to entrepreneurs, but what we've done to educate the investors in this is to have educational programs. Rod, you were part of that. We had a panel on investing in agriculture because our group was not investing in agriculture. And since we actually had that we've had entrepreneurs, which you probably aren't aware because I haven't talked to you for a while, but we have had entrepreneurs in the ag space come and present to the group. We have one now that's entering a due diligence program. So that did help. The due diligence process, for example, I don't want to belabor this, but the point being is, I do agree with you. And we need to bring in people new to investing. Absolutely. And while we're at 65, our goal is to get to 90 and then 120, but it takes time.
Yeah, I just kind of want to comment on that, and maybe a response from Dave or Patrick, but the community, the angel community in Minnesota is very conservative because we as Minnesotans are very conservative people. Not only are we angel investors who are conservative, but we live conservatively. We run our lives conservatively and things like that. So it's part of our culture. And I'm just curious because you're basically asking people to break their culture, get outside of your conservative mentality to go forward to that. So I'm curious as to what you would say is how you would actually change that beyond just here's a class about investing. But second to that, I mean, there has, in my noticing, been huge change. Ryan Brochard from Confluence is a big breath of fresh air on this front, but and he's working extremely hard, but it is proportionally minimal compared to other areas. And I don't see personally the institutional side, the venture firms, as being the ones that really lack in Minnesota. I see it more on the angel early venture / super angel side. So I'm just curious, outside of just education, like what would you suggest Minnesotans do to change who they are and get over that?
Yeah, quick answer to that, and then we're going to go to questions because we don't want to. A quick answer to that is I think we need some successes. If we can have, and you're right, very conservative, we're seeing it in our group entirely, waiting, I think in your case we said we want to wait a while to see how you develop. So that's typical, although I will say a year later someone will come back and we will invest. And in that meantime, over that year, that company will have pivoted more than once and learned a lot and be more investable. Nonetheless, I think what we need, even Go for Angels, 3 years we haven't had any exits yet, we need some successes in order to attract more investors and get a little bit more on the riskier side, frankly, because this is how it's done. That's my view. And Patrick, if you want to have anything to add to that, and then I think we should go to questions.
Yeah, no, I think it is successes. I think one of the things that's driving this is for a lot of the very successful Minnesota companies so far, or I shouldn't say very successful, very promising Minnesota companies, a lot of them bootstrapped through angel funding, right? And I think that's part of the problem is that a lot of really successful businesses went out and they actually got customers and revenues and profits and they control their own destiny. And what happens then is all of a sudden venture firms start getting interested in you, and a lot of times they'll jump the angel portion of raising money. Okay, so I think what we do need is we do need some successes that have specifically raised angel money so people see those individuals who actually made money on those investments. So I'm just agreeing with you, but I think that's something that people don't talk about that much that's driving a fair amount of the reason why we haven't had a lot of those successes driven into the angel community. There's certainly been angel success. I just don't think it's as public as people would like.
So I think we should go to questions so we don't hog all the time here. And I'm going to, so everybody can hear you, I'm going to pass the mic.
So I've heard a couple trends here, and one is that money is moving away from the centers and spreading around the country more, and the other one is that well, unlike in the animal kingdom and more like with computers, you've got cell phones eating tablets, eating PCs, eating supercomputers. And similarly, it sounds like you've got angel investors moving into the venture capital space and all of this stuff moving and eventually end up in sovereign wealth or whatever. So the question that comes up is, fine, what do you see being in this space as rates of change? How fast do you see this happening? You were saying a year and a half, you've seen quite a bit of change. What do you see in the next year and a half? Are we talking Moore's Law rates or are we talking genetic rates?
Okay, so a rate of change, the crystal ball. I think that what we're going to see, in my mind, what we're working on, if it's successful, let's put it that way, more co-investing with other groups, primarily in the Midwest is what we're targeting. We have Sophia Fund, Kathy's here. So, but to answer your question, right now, and a little bit about what Patrick said, everybody's moving upstream a little bit. So we're now moving into what would have been angel investing in a couple of $100,000, which is not bad. I'm not saying that, but we're now moving in the either side of $1 million to 1.5, grouping our dollars together with other angel groups, for example, or Arthur Ventures. We haven't co-invested yet, but right now we're in 2 due diligence processes, and we're working with other groups in that. And the amount of money going into that company, if it works, it's not done yet, would be double what we would have done on our own. So to answer your question, I think there's going to be more money because we are developing these relationships. Does that kind of answer your question?
I think
When do you eat his space?
We're sort of an introductory, they're later than normally we would be. And I think, I'll let you answer, but I think if we do our job as angel investors, we will have funded a company then that will reach the level where Patrick would be interested.
I think that's fine.
All right.
Thank you. I think the 2 gentlemen brought up a point about there being a communication gap. And a lot of it is how do we pollinate, between our individual focuses. So it's a lot of entrepreneurs here. Somehow, they need to pollinate their ideas out there. But also the investment world has to be able to somehow reach not just this level, but this level and this level. Next week, or actually Friday night, I'm giving a presentation at the university on entrepreneurship. And it's to a group of engineers who are very creative, and they're building all kinds of things. And they're very excited about that, but they know absolutely nothing about business. And there you have the Carlson School is right next door. And they're not communicating.
I was going to say, can I say something real quick first? Can I answer that real quick, and then I'm going to pass it off. This is just my comment, having gone through that. It's not hard to find anybody who's an investor if you, A, have an investable company, and B, you have the sales hustle to do it. If you have enough ambition to sell your company, to sell your product out there, you have the skills and the ambition to find investors. When it comes to angels, LinkedIn is easy. I mean, you just start friending people on LinkedIn or connecting them, whatever they call it, and you can talk to them, anyone in the country. And
I mean to say it's difficult.
Okay.
Investors, and I just climbed out of the basement 2 weeks ago, and I'm talking to one of the top leading companies in the industry for 3D printing next week.
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks of networking.
Right.
And right up to the top. So that's what Minnesota, I think, does do very well.
Right.
It's networking.
Right. So I don't know if that answers the pollination side of it. Maybe I missed your question, but
Yeah.
okay.
Well, that's where, our site, ideagist.com, is trying to fill the gap which is helping people to network with each other, there is a real danger in approaching people that you don't know as investors because there are some SEC rules that would prevent you from approaching them with investment offerings. So that needs there needs to be some thought process in there. But that's the purpose of IdeaGist exactly, so people can, it holds their hands, walks them through a process, and help them communicate and network with other people, just trying to help each other, as much as they can. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I just got out of the U, just to quickly, and definitely the engineers and the Carlson kids, they don't talk, but as somebody who was in CLA, if you want to get it done, you can get it done. My question for all of you is, I'm an entrepreneur, I spoke earlier, and I talk a lot to a lot of entrepreneurs under 40. We all seem to have our own picture of what we'd like to see the community look like. Everything I know says that having a good understanding of the vision for where we're going is important for us to all get there. I'm curious what the vision is from your perspectives. We all want exits, we all want an investment community, but what exactly does the Minnesota world look like to you when we get there? Because culturally, it's not going to look like Silicon Valley. We kind of know that already. What does it look like that you guys actually want to see us achieve from your perspective so that we can all kind of get on the same page? Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Good job. I can't speak for anybody. I can speak for myself and what I'd personally like to see. I come out of an inner city community economic development background, and I'd like to see that there's a continuum of funding, that for all the different life cycles of a business at all the different stages, that there's capital available for that. And one of the concerns about angels becoming VCs is it leaves huge gaps of funding. And one of the most interesting things for me in the crowdfunding space over the last 3 years in the 60+ portals that we've built is that it's not just for startup money at all. There's working capital and factoring and all of these other types of capital needs for companies to continue to grow and expand. So for me, it's about that continuum of funding. And the second is it's about the demographic of who's getting funded and where they're getting funded, and that you don't have to move to Minneapolis and St. Paul from Buffalo in order to get funding any more than you have to move from Minneapolis and St. Paul to Silicon Valley to get funding. That we need to be able to find ways to fund companies to grow in the communities where they are and to add the jobs there. We all are evangelists of the numbers that it's the small businesses that are the ones that add the jobs. The big public companies, they stay pretty static or increase their profits by decreasing jobs. So if we're going to keep people working, it's those small businesses, and we need to be able to fund those in the community. So for me, the two is that continuum of funding and the demographic of funding.